Hi, and welcome to the Men on the Path to Love podcast, the Why Healthy Relationships Can Feel Uncomfortable at First episode. I'm Bill Simpson, your host. I coach men who are rebuilding their lives and relationships after breakup or divorce, helping them understand their relationship patterns, grow into the best version of themselves, and create deeper love and real connection, showing up differently for the next chapter of their lives so they can live the life they love. So this episode wraps up my series on building a healthy relationship. Over the past several episodes, I've talked about emotional safety, communication, conflict, trust, vulnerability, and the skills most men were never taught when it comes to love and connection. But there's one final piece that's really important to understand. Because after doing the work, after healing, and after becoming more emotionally aware, there's something that men discover that surprises them. That healthy relationships don't always feel the way they expected them to feel. In fact, sometimes healthy relationships can feel uncomfortable at first. Why? Because many of us were conditioned to associate love with intensity. The butterflies, the chasing, the uncertainty, the emotional highs and lows, the drama, the anxiety. Well, when all those things aren't there, it can actually feel like something is missing. That's what I'm going to talk about today. Why healthy love can initially feel unfamiliar, and how old relationship patterns shape attraction, and how to recognize the difference between peace and disconnection. I want to begin with my own experience. When I met my wife, it felt very different from the relationships I had experienced in the past. There was definitely attraction and chemistry, but there weren't those overwhelming butterflies, There wasn't that intense emotional roller coaster. There wasn't a feeling of obsession or urgency that I had felt before. What I felt instead was peace and calm. A sense of, yeah, man, this feels right. And honestly, it felt like home. And strangely enough, that actually felt uncomfortable at first. And I remember thinking, what am I missing? And what I realized later was this. I was missing the intensity that I used to feel in other relationships. The drama, the emotional unpredictability that I had unconsciously associated with love. And another thing that really stood out to me and surprised me was that I felt completely free to be myself. Yeah, I didn't have to perform and pretend to be someone I wasn't. I didn't have to give up parts of myself just to stay connected. I could simply be me. And she chose me in spite of it, or as she says, because of it. Well, over time, I did get used to the calm and peace. I got used to the consistency. And most importantly, I got used to being true to myself inside a relationship. And that feeling of home has remained consistent for the over 17 years my wife and I have been together. And I think it's important to understand that sometimes healthy love doesn't feel uncomfortable because something is wrong. Sometimes it feels uncomfortable because it's different from what you're used to. And that brings me to someone I'll call Nate, not his real name. When Nate first came to see me, he didn't have a very good track record when it came to relationships. Yeah, man, he had experienced a lot of relationships that either became toxic or they never seemed to go anywhere meaningful. And he often made these broad generalizations about women, saying things like, all women are manipulative, all women just want money, all women are crazy. Well, I reminded him to be careful with those kind of generalizations, because often those beliefs reflect our experiences and wounds more so than reality itself. So rather than focusing entirely on women, I encouraged Nate to focus on himself, to explore his own patterns, to ask himself, what part am I playing in why these relationships aren't working? Well, Nate resisted at first, but as we unpacked things together, Nate ended up having this huge realization. He noticed that whenever the initial sexual intensity faded or whenever the relationship reached the conflict stage, he would leave. The thing is, he was constantly chasing the intensity, chasing the emotional high. And when relationships got more real or more grounded or more emotionally intimate, he lost interest. Well, that insight changed everything for Nate. And during the course of our work together, he met someone who I'll call Cassie. He told me that she was cute. He was attracted to her. She was easy to talk to, kind, and seemed to have this emotional groundedness about her. But he also said something interesting. He said, "Bill, I don't think it's going to work. Something feels missing." And so we explored that, and I asked him intuitively, is it the intensity that feels missing? And after thinking about it, he admitted that was part of it. Then he told me something else that surprised him. He said that he was usually attracted to what he called naughty girls. You know, the more promiscuous or emotionally unpredictable type. But Cassie was different. Nate described her as a good girl, and he admitted that part of him felt bored. So I seized the moment to explore that. And I explained to him that healthy relationships often feel different because they're built on consistency and predictability rather than chaos. You know, that intensity can feel exciting, but intensity alone does not sustain relationships. Real relationships require a sense of trust, consistency, predictability, like I said, and emotional safety. I also told him that it doesn't mean relationships should become stagnant or boring. No. Healthy relationships still require the effort, the playfulness, that spontaneity, some romance, and of course growth. But overall, they tend to feel more steady, more grounded, more like a consistent flow. You know, if you think of a cosine, like a wave, rather than highs and lows, sharp emotional peaks and valleys, right? We also talked about needing that compatibility, shared values, and emotional maturity. And I told him that those things are often what create longevity in relationships, going for the long term of the relationship. And Nate really took that to heart. And over time, he began appreciating the difference in his relationship with Cassie. Instead of chasing those emotional highs, he started to value the emotional safety and connection that they had. And I could see his growth and maturity was very evident. Now, I don't know whether Nate and Cassie are still together today, but I do know this. Nate was finally moving in a healthier direction. And that's another important thing to take away from this. Growth in relationships often requires us to question what we've been conditioned to mistake for love. Now, interestingly enough, research actually supports this idea. Studies on attachment and relationship dynamics show that people who grew up around inconsistency, emotional unpredictability, criticism, abandonment, or chaos can unconsciously associate emotional activation with love. In other words, if calm and stability were unfamiliar growing up, then healthy relationships can initially feel emotionally flat or even uncomfortable. Doctors Stan Stockton, Sue Johnson, and John and Julie Gottman all talk about the importance of emotional safety, consistency, and secure attachment in healthy relationships. And yet many people entering healthier relationships initially interpret that steadiness as boredom, especially if they're used to anxiety-based attachment patterns. So, what are some signs that a relationship may actually be healthy even if it feels unfamiliar. So I have some for you. One is that you feel emotionally safe expressing yourself. That's big, being able to be vulnerable without the fear of any kind of retaliation from your partner. Yeah. Another one is you don't constantly worry about where you stand. There's clarity in the relationship. Clarity from your partner, from yourself, and establishing boundaries that stick. Another is you feel accepted for who you are. In my case, I could actually be me and not feel like I had to be someone I wasn't or try to impress. Just being accepted for who you are. Another thing that can feel uncomfortable is when conflict doesn't automatically threaten the relationship. Yeah, healthy relationships are going to have conflict. It happens. And healthy relationships just handle it, and they repair after conflict. Another sign that the relationship could actually be healthy is that you can relax instead of constantly having to perform. That goes back to feeling accepted for who you are, right? You don't have to perform. You just get to be yourself. Another thing is there's consistency between words and actions. Yeah, you're actually doing what you say, or your partner is actually doing what she says. And that can feel unusual if you're not used to it, of course. And the last one I'll say is that you feel more grounded in the relationship than emotionally exhausted. Yeah, if you're on this roller coaster ride over and over again, up and down, up and down, up and down, that can be exhausting. And when things feel just kind of status quo, that cosine, like a wave, that can feel really strange when you're not used to it. And I'm saying that because I've been through all that. I know personally. Okay. Yeah. And I want you to understand that if healthy love feels uncomfortable to you at first, don't panic. Just slow down and get curious. Because sometimes what we call chemistry, that intensity, it's actually anxiety or unpredictability, or that emotional activation that feels familiar to our nervous system. And sometimes what we call boring is actually peace and calm. And again, if you've spent years in relationships filled with chasing that intensity, the inconsistency, mixed signals, emotional highs and lows, that constant uncertainty, then a healthy relationship may initially feel emotionally bland or quieter. And it's not because there's no connection, but because your nervous system is no longer operating in survival mode. That's a lot of what that intensity is. That can feel unfamiliar and even unsettling. And you may find yourself wondering man, why am I not obsessing over this person like I usually do? Or why don't I feel the same emotional intensity? Or why does this feel so calm? But calm isn't necessarily a bad thing. No, man, in many cases, calm is what safety feels like. Yeah, healthy relationships often allow you to just exhale instead of constantly wondering where you stand. Healthy relationships allow you to relax and be yourself instead of performing to keep your partner interested. And healthy relationships allow you to be emotionally present instead of emotionally distracted or consumed. All right? So instead of immediately assuming something is wrong, ask yourself, am I actually bored or am I just unfamiliar with peace and calm? Because, man, that question alone can change everything. Because sometimes healing means learning that love doesn't always have to hurt you, exhaust you, confuse you, or destabilize you in order to be real. And remember, this is a process, and it takes time and practice. Give yourself grace as you begin to trust yourself in this process. Now, if this episode resonates with you, and you want support rebuilding after breakup or divorce, or understanding your old relationship patterns, or learning how to create healthier relationships moving forward, then visit my website, menonthepathtolove.com. You'll find coaching information, podcast episodes, resources, and some tools to support you on your path to love. So it is Quote of the Week time, and this one comes from author Nidra Glover Tawwab, and it's direct and to the point. It says, quote, "Healthy relationships are calm, and calm can feel unfamiliar when you're used to chaos." Unquote. Yeah, man, enough said. And that's going to do it for this episode of the Men on the Path to Love podcast, the Why Healthy Relationships Can Feel Uncomfortable at First episode. My name is Bill Simpson, and as I close out this series on building a healthy relationship, I just want to thank you for being on this journey with me. And if you haven't checked out the whole series, I encourage you to do so. And look, I'm not stopping there, because understanding healthy relationships is one thing. Becoming the version of ourselves capable of sustaining one is another thing. That's where we're headed next. My next series is all about becoming the man capable of a healthy relationship. And as we begin this new series, I'm starting with an important truth that many men discover after breakup or divorce. The version of you that created your last relationship cannot create your next one. And that's not about blame, it's about growth. Because every relationship we experience reflects not only who we choose, but how we show up. And if we don't grow beyond the version of ourselves that created unhealthy dynamics in the past, we often end up recreating similar experiences with different people. Yeah, different face, same emotional patterns. And listen, real change requires more than just wanting a healthy relationship. It requires becoming someone capable of creating one. And in the next episode, I'm going to explore the difference between repeating old patterns and intentionally evolving into a new version of yourself. One capable of deeper love, emotional maturity, healthy communication, and real connection. So until then, I've got something for you to think about. What parts of yourself may need to grow, heal, or evolve in order to create the kind of relationship you truly want? Give that some thought, and please join me for the version of you that created your last relationship can't create your next one episode. And if you got something out of listening to this episode, then please share the link with someone who may need to hear it, and share the love. And until next time, keep your heart open and stay on the path to love.